What's up, my game programming Padawans? This is your Jedi Master, Michael here to show you the ways of the code. And today is the last day we will be working in the Windows console application. After this, we're going to graduate and start working in Windows Forms, which has like more buttons and graphical elements. So this is kind of the final test, or the final exam, if you will, of the Windows console application. Today we're going to be making a game, and basically we're going to make a list that has 6 random numbers in it. The numbers will be randomly out of order, and the user can pick 2 numbers he or she would like to swap. And the goal is to keep swapping the numbers until all 6 numbers are in numerical ascending order. So this will use everything we've learned so far: for loops, while loops, if statements. We will write our own function, and it will introduce a few new things like a list. So I already have an empty project generated. If you guys are ready, let's do this thing. So first things first, I'm going to make a new list of ints, and I'm going to call it list. And list is a class, so similar to how we use the random function, we need to create a new instance of this list by calling new. Now, the little arrow brackets that you see right here, you see the word int inside of it. This can be replaced with anything you want. So we could have a list of strings if we did that. We could have a list of bools if we did that. The arrows are used to signify what type of data is stored in this list. Next, we need to create a new instance of the random class, just like we've done for the last few videos. Random equals new random. And we will need 2 ints to store what the user is wanting to swap. So let's say if the user wants to swap the number 22 and 71, we need a way to store 22 and 71. So let's do that. Int swap 1, comma, swap 2. And this is a different way we can define 2 ints at once. In the past, we've had a new line, int swap 1, int swap 2, but you can also separate them by commas like this to condense it into one line. And some people might not think this is a good idea. It's just personal preference, whatever you want to do. I kind of like it. So press enter. So now we need to populate the list with some numbers. So if you type list dot, you'll see a whole bunch of functions that are in the list class that we can call. One of them is called add, which basically enough lets us add a number. So if we wanted to add 1 to the list, we would just call it like this. But like I said earlier, we want to add 6 random numbers into the list. So instead of typing list.add, a whole bunch of times like that, let's use a for loop that will make our lives easier. So let's go ahead and type for int I equals 0, and we want to run this for loop 6 times. So we will say less than 6, I++ to increase the count, curly brackets, and here we will say list.add, and we want to have a random number in between the range of, let's say, 0 to 99, I guess is fine. So let's say random.next 0, 100, and remember, it's 1 less than whatever we pass in for maximum, so that will give us 0 through 99. And now we should have 6 random numbers inside of our list. Let's go ahead and start basic by displaying a message to the user explaining what's going on here. Let's say console.writeLine swap the numbers in ascending. Okay. Swap the numbers until they're in ascending numerical order. And here we will need to have our main game loop. Remember, in the past we used a while loop. Let's do that. But this time, instead of using a bool, we will just say while true. And this while loop will loop infinitely until we get out of it. So go ahead and put those brackets there. I'm going to show you guys later how we can break out of this loop. So just hold on for that. And the first thing we need to do is clear the variables that we're using in the gameplay. We have these variables, swap1 and swap2, and each time we start this loop over, we're going to be checking these numbers to see what the user has picked. But if we keep numbers in these values from last time, our logic will think that the user has already selected some numbers, and we don't want that. We want to start clean, start fresh at the very beginning of each loop. So let's say swap1 equals -1 and swap2 equals -1. That's a typical kind of error code, and we know we'll never have a number that's less than 0, so that's a good number to clear things out to. Let's press enter. The next thing we want to do is display the numbers that are inside this list. The user will need to see these numbers so he or she knows what they want to swap. The thing is, though, we will probably need to write out these numbers 2 or 3 times inside of this loop. And that should raise a red flag in your mind, because whenever you have to copy and paste the same code over and over, that's a clear sign that you want to write a function that contains this code, and then just call that function whenever you need this code to be executed. So let's go down here outside of the main function, and we're going to create a new function called static void, because this function won't return anything. It will just print out our numbers. Write out list can be the name of this function, and we'll need access to that list we want to write out. So to get access to it, we can just pass it into the function like this, list int list. Then go down here, put in the curly brackets, and now we can actually write out this list that was passed into the function. Let's start by iterating through this list. For int I equals 0, we want to run this loop for as long as I is less than the size of this list. And we could say we want to run this loop for as long as I is less than 6, but this variable right here, list.count, that will always be set to however many items are in the list. So let's use that because that's more dynamic. Maybe the list gets changed and there's 8 items in it next time, and this will automatically adjust for that. Let's say I++, add our curlies, and then in here we can say console.writeLine. Oh no, let's do console.write parentheses, and then we need access to the numbers that are inside of this list. So there's 6 numbers inside list. We'll say list and then bracket, and then whatever number we type in here for the index is the item in the list that we're getting. And remember, programmers start counting at 0, so if we say list bracket 0 bracket, this is the very first number inside of our list. However, since we're inside this for loop, we can just pass in I. So at first I is 0, so we access list at sub 0, then I is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it will print out everything that's in this list. So semicolon, and we should also separate these numbers with a comma. So let's say quotation, comma, space. And last but not least, we should probably use console.writeLine to start us on a new line for when we write text next time. So console.writeLine. And this next part is the easy part. Let's go back up here and actually call our function. Let's say write out list, pass in our list, oops, and then it should be printed. Let's press F5 and see what happens. Yep, 6 random numbers are being printed over and over and over again because we're running the same line of code infinitely. But we'll fix that in a second here when we start checking for user input. So let's go ahead and work on that. The player will need to pick 2 numbers, so we'll be asking for input 2 times. The first time we want to ask for the first number they want to swap, and then the second time we'll ask for the second number. So 2 numbers, and then we'll swap the values of each of those numbers. So what happens if the user picks a number that is not in the list? Bad things will probably happen. So we need to check for that. So I think the easiest way to handle this is to put our readline call inside of another while loop. So basically, we'll ask the user to pick a number. If the number is not in the list we have, we'll ask again, and we'll keep asking over and over and over until they finally pick a number that's valid. So let's say while, and in here we need to actually check and be sure the player has picked a valid number. We're going to store the number they pick inside of swap1. How would we check to see if swap1 is inside of this list? Well, luckily, there's a function. If you hit list dot, there's a function here called contains, and it returns a bool, true or false, and it determines whether an element is in the list. So that is exactly what we want. So while list contains swap1 equals false, we will go inside of these curly brackets, and while the user has not picked a number that is inside of our list, we will ask them to pick a number. So let's say console.writeLine. What's the first number you want to swap? Semicolon. And then here, just like we've done before, we're going to say swap1 equals convert.toInt32. And then here we'll pass in console.readLine. And whatever number the player picks will be stored into swap1. After we store that value, we'll go back to the top of the while loop, and we'll see if the list contains the number the player has picked. So once the player has picked a valid number, we'll go outside of that while loop, and basically we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to ask for a second number, so let's just copy and paste this. Let's change the variables to swap2, swap2, and here we'll say what's the second number you want to swap. And let's do a little thought experiment here. What if the player picks the number 12 for the first number they want to swap, and then when the computer asks for the second number they want to swap, they pick 12 again? That's going to create some problems, so we want to make sure the player is not allowed to do that. So up here in the while parentheses, let's say while the list does not contain swap2 or the number we've picked is equal to the first number we picked. So if we pick the same number twice, we'll ask the user to pick again. Cool. Finally, we need to actually swap these numbers once we have them. So to do that, we'll need to iterate through our list, and once we find the first number we want to swap, we'll swap the first number with the second number, and when we find the second number we want to swap, we'll swap the value of the second number with the value of the first number. And that's easy because we have them stored in these variables, swap2 and swap1. So let's iterate through our list. While I is less than list.count, we will iterate on through. And here we'll say if list I, in other words, the number in the list we are currently looking at, is equal to the first value we want to swap, this number in the list will be set to the value of the second number we want to swap. And for the second number, we'll do the same type of logic, just reversed. Else if the number we are looking at is equal to the second number we want to swap, we will set this number to the value of the first number we want to swap. Alright, let's press F5. We should see something work now. What's the first number you want to swap? I'm going to swap 96 with 13. And it's worked. Notice how 13 and 96 have swapped places in our list. So now 13 is the first number in the list. It was the last number in the list. Okay. The only problem with this is that if we actually sort all these numbers and make them the correct order, the game never really ends because we haven't checked for a game over case, right? So let's take care of that now. Let's go down below this for loop. And the only way to check if our numbers are in the correct order is to calculate what the correct order actually is. And luckily, C# has a really nice helper function in here that will automatically sort numbers in lists to be ascending numerical order. However, we will need to create a new list to do this because we don't want to sort the list the player is using because that would basically let the player automatically win. So let's create a new list called sorted list, and we will set it to a new list int. But inside these parentheses here, we have a few different options. We could create an empty list like last time, but there's also the ability here to pass in another list, and it will copy in the values of the old list into this new list, and that's exactly what we want. We'll pass in our old list, and now this is the easy part. We just have to call a function that's already in here for us. Let's say sorted list dot sort, and our list should be sorted. Now the final step in all of this is we have our sorted list, that is the correct order the numbers should be in. We need to check and see if the sorted list is in the same order as the player's list. So, luckily, there's another function that helps us do that. Let's say if list dot sequence equal, and this does exactly what it says. It's going to check to see if the sequence is equal of another list that has been passed in. So if the sorted list has the same sequence as our normal list, we have won the game. At this point, we should display a positive message to the screen. Let's say console.writeLine, you win. And now we need a way to break out of that infinite while loop I was talking about earlier. Remember the one that says while true? That will infinitely run unless we break out of it. But luckily, there's a very easy word we can type here, break, semicolon. And whenever break is typed like this, it will take us out of whatever loop we're currently in. So this will work with for loops, while loops, any type of loop. When you hit break, it will break us out of the current loop we are in. So this will get us out of the while loop, and it should exit the console. We should probably add a console.readLine outside of the while loop so we can at least see that message that we won before everything exits. So let's say readLine out here. And it would also be nice to display the numbers in our list one more time, because remember, currently the writeOutList function is being called at the very beginning of the while loop. So why don't we call that function one more time before we exit the loop so the player can see the final sequence of numbers they've sorted. So we'll call writeOutList, list, semicolon. And at this point, the game should be ready to play. Let's press F5. Alright. What's the first number you want to swap? I want to swap 20 with 6. Now I want to swap 66 with 9. Now I want to swap 20 with 61. I want to swap 69 with 66. Oh, oops, I should have done, okay, 61 with 66. And then finally, 69 with 66. Okay. And I win the game. Alright guys, that should be it. Good job programming this game. I'll see you guys on the next episode.